Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the far reaches of the galaxy, where the stars burned cold and distant, humanity was on the brink of annihilation. The Zorans, an alien race bred for war and conquest, had swept through human colonies like a plague, their super soldiers decimating defenses that had once seemed impregnable. Planets that had been thriving hubs of life were now barren wastelands, echoes of their former glory buried under the rubble of defeat. Humanity, once confident in its dominion over the stars, now found itself cornered, desperate, and outmatched. But in the darkest hour, hope was born in the form of a secret project, a last-ditch effort by Earth's greatest minds to create a weapon powerful enough to turn the tide. Deep within a fortified research facility on the outskirts of Earth's last free city, Dr. Alara Stone, a scientist of unmatched brilliance and determination, oversaw the creation of Orion. Orion was not just any soldier, he was the pinnacle of human ingenuity, a fusion of flesh and machine designed to embody the best of both worlds. Orion had once been human, a soldier named Jason Hayes, who had volunteered for the experiment after witnessing the horrors inflicted by the Zorans firsthand. His body had been enhanced with cutting-edge cybernetics, his reflexes and strength augmented beyond natural limits. But it wasn't just his physical abilities that set him apart, his mind had been integrated with advanced AI, giving him the ability to process information and strategize at a speed that no human could match. Orion was humanity's last hope, the one warrior who could stand against the Zorans and give the galaxy a fighting chance. His first deployment was to Gorgon 4, a colony on the edge of human-controlled space that had become a crucial battleground. The Zorans had launched a full-scale assault on the planet, and the human defenders were barely holding on. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning metal as Orion descended onto the battlefield, his presence immediately shifting the tide of war. Orion moved through the battlefield like a force of nature. His enhanced vision allowed him to see the Zorans even through the thickest smoke, and his cybernetic limbs carried him faster than any human could run. He wielded a plasma rifle with deadly precision, each shot finding its mark as he cut through the enemy ranks. His cybernetic brain calculated their movements, predicting their attacks and countering them with brutal efficiency. The Zorans, who had never known defeat, found themselves facing a foe they could not overcome. With each victory, Orion became more than just a soldier, he became a symbol of hope. His name spread across the galaxy, whispered in awe and reverence. The galactic war god, they called him, the one who had the power to save them all. But with each battle, Orion also learned more about his enemies. He observed the way the Zorans moved in perfect unison, how they seemed to anticipate human tactics as if guided by a single, calculating mind. It was during a particularly fierce engagement on the outskirts of Gorgon for that Orion made a critical discovery. As he fought his way through the Zoran ranks, he noticed a subtle pattern in their movements, a rhythm that was too precise to be natural. It was then that he realized the truth: the Zorans were not just super soldiers, they were connected to a centralized command network that coordinated their actions, turning them into a single, cohesive force. Orion relayed this discovery to Dr. Stone and the military high command. The implications were staggering. If they could disrupt the Zoran command network, they could weaken the entire alien force, making them vulnerable to defeat. It was a glimmer of hope in a war that had seemed all but lost, but there was a catch. The Zoran command network was housed deep within their most fortified stronghold, Novus Prime, a planet located in the heart of Zoran-controlled space. Infiltrating it would be a near-suicidal mission, even for Orion. But he knew it was the only way to end the war and save humanity from extinction. Without hesitation, he accepted the mission. Orion's journey to Novus Prime was fraught with danger. The planet was a fortress, its surface bristling with advanced defense systems and elite Zoran warriors. But Orion was undeterred. Using his cybernetic enhancements, he bypassed the planet's defenses with a combination of stealth and sheer force. He moved through the shadows, his every step calculated to avoid detection. His mind was focused, his mission clear: destroy the command network, no matter the cost. As he penetrated deeper into the stronghold, Orion encountered resistance like never before. The Zorans seemed to sense the threat he posed and threw their most powerful warriors at him. The battles were fierce, each one testing the limits of his abilities. But Orion fought with a ferocity born of desperation, knowing that failure was not an option. Finally, he reached the heart of the Zoran command center. It was a massive structure, pulsating with energy as it controlled the movements of the Zoran army across the galaxy. But standing in his way was Supreme Commander Kaeldar, the leader of the Zorans and the architect of their conquest. Kaeldar was a towering figure, clad in armor that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. His eyes burned with an intensity that matched Orion's own, and in that moment, both warriors knew that only one of them would leave the command center alive. The battle between Orion and Kaeldar was nothing short of legendary. They clashed with the force of titans, their blows shaking the very foundations of the stronghold. Kaeldar was fast, faster than any Zoran Orion had faced before, and his strikes were devastating, each one capable of shattering steel. But Orion was relentless, his cybernetic brain calculating and recalculating strategies in the blink of an eye. The fight raged on, both warriors pushing themselves to their absolute limits. But as the battle wore on, Orion began to see cracks in Kaeldar's defenses. He realized that Kaeldar's strength lay not just in his physical power, but in his connection to the command network. It was the network that gave him his edge, that allowed him to anticipate Orion's moves. And it was this connection that Orion had to sever. In a final, desperate move, Orion unleashed everything he had, channeling all of his remaining energy into a single, devastating strike. The blow shattered Kaeldar's armor and severed his connection to the command network, leaving him vulnerable. With a final, mighty effort, Orion brought Kaeldar to his knees and delivered the killing blow, ending the Zoran leader's reign of terror, but the victory came at a great cost. Orion's systems were failing, his human side barely clinging to life. With the last of his strength, he accessed the command network and uploaded the virus that Dr. Stone had prepared. The virus spread through the network like wildfire, disrupting the Zoran forces across the galaxy and leaving them in disarray. Orion collapsed as the stronghold began to crumble around him. He had fulfilled his mission, but at the cost of his own life. As the rescue team arrived, Dr. Stone found him on the brink of death, his once powerful body broken and battered. In his final moments, Orion looked up at her, his human eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness. "Remember me," he whispered, "not just as the machine I became, but as the man I once was." And with that, Orion, the galactic war god, breathed his last breath. In the aftermath of Orion's sacrifice, the galaxy slowly began to rebuild. The Zoran threat had been neutralized, their forces scattered and leaderless. Humanity, battered but not broken, emerged from the war with a renewed sense of purpose. Statues were erected in Orion's honor, and his story became legend, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable human spirit. Dr. Stone, moved by the loss of the man who had become her greatest creation, dedicated her life to ensuring that humanity would never again face such a dire threat. She continued her research, pushing the boundaries of science and technology in the hopes of creating a future where no one would have to sacrifice as Orion had, and so, the legend of the galactic war god lived on, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that had once known only darkness. Orion's name became synonymous with heroism, and his legacy endured for generations, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could still triumph. Dr. Elara Stone stood silently in the cavernous lab, her eyes fixed on the data scrolling across the screen. The lab, once filled with the hum of machinery and the chatter of researchers, was now eerily quiet. It had been weeks since Orion's final mission, and the absence of his presence weighed heavily on everyone who had worked on the project. The lab, which had once been a beacon of hope, now felt like a mausoleum, a place where the memories of their fallen hero lingered in every corner. The data on the screen was a posthumous analysis of Orion's last moments, his vitals, the degradation of his cybernetic systems, the precise moment when his human heart had finally given out. Dr. Stone had reviewed this data countless times, searching for something, anything, that might have changed the outcome. But no matter how many times she went over it, the result was always the same. Orion had succeeded in his mission, but at the ultimate cost. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of the lab's intercom. She glanced up, pushing aside the lingering sorrow as she answered. "Yes?" "Dr. Stone, you have a visitor," came the voice of one of her assistants, tinged with a note of hesitation. "It's General Hayes." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. General Hayes, Jason's father. She hadn't seen him since the day his son had volunteered for the project. Back then, the general had been resolute, supportive of his son's decision to sacrifice his humanity for the greater good. But now, Ilara wasn't sure what to expect. "Send him in," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. The door to the lab slid open with a quiet hiss, and General Hayes stepped inside. He was a tall man, his posture rigid, as if held together by sheer force of will. His uniform was immaculate, his expression unreadable. But when his eyes met Ilara's, she saw the grief buried beneath his stoic exterior. "General," she greeted him, standing a little straighter. "It's good to see you." "Dr. Stone," he replied, his voice deep and measured. "I wish it were under different circumstances." Ilara nodded, unsure of what to say. The silence between them stretched on, heavy with unspoken words. "I came to see the place where my son's legacy was born," Hayes finally said, his gaze sweeping across the lab. "To understand what drove him to become what he did." Ilara swallowed hard, her throat tightening. Jason, Orion, was a hero. Without him, we wouldn't have survived. His sacrifice, "I know what he did," Hayes interrupted, his voice sharp. But then he softened, his eyes filled with a pain that Ilara recognized all too well. "But I also know what it cost him. What it cost all of us." Ilara looked away, her eyes stinging. She had spent countless nights wrestling with the same thoughts, questioning whether she had done the right thing by allowing Jason to become Orion. She had told herself that it was necessary, that without him, humanity would have fallen. But the knowledge did little to ease the guilt that gnawed at her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Hayes approached her, his footsteps echoing in the quiet lab. "I'm not here to blame you, Ilara. My son made his choice. And in doing so, he saved us all. But I need to know. Was there ever a moment when he regretted it?" Ilara met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the sorrow she felt. "No," she said firmly. Orion never wavered. He knew what was at stake, and he embraced it fully. Even in the end, when he knew he wouldn't make it, he was at peace with his decision. He believed in what he was doing, and he believed in us. The general nodded slowly, as if absorbing her words. He took a deep breath, exhaling it slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. "Thank you," he murmured. "That's what I needed to hear." Ilara nodded, the weight in her chest lightening ever so slightly. "We're continuing the work, General. Orion's sacrifice wasn't in vain. We're making sure that humanity will never be in such a vulnerable position again. We've learned from this, and we're stronger for it." Hayes's gaze turned thoughtful. "Stronger," he repeated, almost to himself. "Jason always wanted to make a difference. I suppose, in the end, he did." "He did," Ilara affirmed. "More than any of us could have imagined." The general looked around the lab one last time, his expression a mixture of pride and sorrow. "I'll leave you to your work, Dr. Stone. Thank you for everything." With that, he turned and walked towards the exit, his steps slower, more deliberate. As the door closed behind him, Elara stood in silence, the echoes of their conversation lingering in the air. She took a deep breath, turning back to her console. There was still so much work to be done, so much to prepare for. Orion had given them the chance to rebuild, to fortify their defenses, and to ensure that humanity would never be caught off guard again. And she owed it to him, to Jason, to make sure that his sacrifice was honored in the only way that mattered, by building a future where no one else would have to make the same choice. The screen before her flickered, displaying new data streams. Elara's fingers danced across the keyboard as she immersed herself in the work, her mind sharp and focused. The grief was still there, a dull ache that would never fully fade, but it was tempered by a renewed sense of purpose. Orion had been their savior, their galactic war god. And now, it was up to those he had saved to carry his legacy forward. As the hours passed, the lab gradually came back to life. Scientists and engineers returned to their stations, the hum of machinery and quiet conversations filling the space once more. Elara continued her work, her thoughts drifting occasionally to the man who had become a legend. In her mind, she could still hear his voice, a faint echo from his final moments, reminding her of what they were fighting for, and so, with determination etched into every line of her face, Dr. Elara Stone pressed on, forging a new path for humanity, a path lit by the memory of a hero who had given everything to protect the future.